there, it's Erica, and today I'm going to show you how to make my sourdough pizza crust. I have two versions for you, one that's super simple and easy, and the other that requires a little more effort but results in some truly amazing pizza. Okay, let's start with the simple recipe. First, here's everything that you'll need. 100 grams of active sourdough starter. An active starter is one that has been fed 4 to 12 hours previously, has doubled in volume, is active and bubbly, and passes the float test. Side note, I keep my starter at 100% hydration, which means I feed it equal weights, not volumes, of flour and water. You'll also need 250 grams of water. You can bump this up to 270 grams of water if you prefer a wetter dough, but I don't find the extra hydration necessary. 200 grams of organic all-purpose flour, 150 grams of organic bread flour. You can substitute more all-purpose flour for the bread flour if that's all you have on hand, but the results won't be quite as sublime. Still great, but not sublime. 1 tablespoon or 10 grams of sugar, 1 tablespoon or 10 grams of extra virgin olive oil, and 1.5 teaspoons or 9 grams of unrefined sea salt. Place all of the dough ingredients in the bowl of a stand mixer. Knead on medium for 15 minutes. Yes, I'm using my paddle attachment because my dough hook bit the dust and I don't know if I can find the right replacement. Anyway, the dough should be elastic and clean the sides of the bowl. Grease a lidded container. Divide the dough in half. Form it into balls and place in the prepared container. Allow to rise at room temperature for 4 hours. Transfer to the refrigerator for 12 to 24 hours to continue to ferment and develop flavor. Now you can use the dough immediately if you prefer and it will still be delicious, but it will have the best flavor if you let it do the cold rise in the refrigerator. Okay, so that's the simple method of mixing together the dough. Let's move on to the fancier, tastier method. We'll be using all the same ingredients as the simple method, but this time we'll be mixing them differently. Place the water in a large mixing bowl. Add the sourdough starter on top and give it a mix with a spatula. Now add the remaining ingredients except for the salt. Use the spatula to mix everything together until there are no more dry bits of flour and you have a shaggy dough. Cover and allow to autolyse or rest for 1 hour. After the hour, sprinkle the salt on top of the dough. Using wet hands, pinch the dough around the salt to start to incorporate it. Quick tip, I like to have a bowl of water on hand next to the bowl so I can easily get my hands wet when I'm working with the dough. Now it's time to perform the first stretch and fold sequence. Think of the dough as having 4 corners. It's round, I know, but just imagine for a second. Grab the edge of the dough from one of the corners, pull it up, and stretch and fold it over to the other side. Repeat with the remaining 3 corners of the dough. Cover the dough back up and allow to rest for 30 to 45 minutes. You're going to repeat this stretch and fold rest sequence 4 to 5 more times for a total of 5 to 6 stretch and fold sequences. This should take about 2 to 2.5 hours or so. The dough will start out sticky and eventually become more elastic. If the dough doesn't seem elastic enough, you can add in another stretch and fold sequence. After you've performed the final stretch and fold, form the dough into 2 balls. Place in greased lidded containers. I just reused the bowl I kneaded the dough in because I hate extra dishes. However, this obviously takes up way too much room in your fridge, so take that into account when selecting your proofing container. Allow the dough balls to rise at room temperature for 1 hour and then either use them immediately or transfer them to the refrigerator for 12 to 24 hours. Again, the cold ferment will really boost the flavor and texture of the pizza crust. Okay, when you're getting close to being ready to make your pizza, take the dough out of the refrigerator and allow it to warm up and rise for 2 to 3 hours. This applies to both the simple method and the stretch and fold method. 45 minutes before you're planning on baking your pizza, place a pizza stone in the oven and preheat it to really hot. My oven only goes up to about 490, so that's what I turn it to. But if your oven goes up to 500, 550 degrees Fahrenheit, do that. When the dough has had a chance to warm up, it's time to shape it into pizza crusts. Dust a square of parchment paper generously with flour. Plop a dough ball onto the flour and then turn over so both sides are coated in flour. Now begin to stretch the dough out into a circle. Work from the center and push the dough out, leaving the edges of the dough alone if you like that puffy edge crust. Another technique that my sister told me about involves pushing your fingers all around the edge of the crust to kind of stake out your puffy edge. Then you can work from the middle and you won't depuff the edge crust. Now, you'll probably only be able to partially roll out the dough on your first attempt. When the dough doesn't want to stretch out anymore, let it relax for 5 to 10 minutes and then come back to it. The gluten should have relaxed enough for you to shape the dough more. Repeat the stretching and resting until you've got the dough to the size you like. Now it's time to top your pizza. Of course, there are endless flavor combinations to choose from. I'm simple and really enjoy pepperoni, red sauce, and black olives. Fresh mozzarella, red sauce, tomatoes, and basil is a classic that's hard to mess up. Now, the main thing to remember with homemade pizza is do not overtop it. The crust will have a hard time getting done under a giant load of toppings. And go easy on the sauce. Use less than you think you should. Speaking of sauce, I have a great recipe for homemade pizza sauce, which I'll have linked down below. Trim the edges of the parchment paper so that there's only a little bit overlapping the crust. crust. If you don't do this, the parchment paper might burn under the intense heat of the oven. Okay, now transfer your pizza creation onto a pizza peel and then into a blazing hot oven it goes. Now the amount of time it will take for your pizza to cook will depend on how hot your oven is, how thick you rolled out the crust, and how many toppings you chose to layer on. I usually cook my sourdough pizza dough for around 15 minutes at 490 to 500-ish. Keep in mind that sourdough can take longer to cook than conventional pizza dough. If you go longer, the center part of the crust will have a better chance of getting cooked all the way through. But if you go a shorter amount of time, the edge crust will be softer. Now look at the difference between the two kneading methods. The machine kneaded crust is definitely flatter with fewer large air holes. The stretch and fold kneaded crust is more light and airy. I had my family taste test the two crusts several times, and it was almost universally agreed that the stretch and fold crust was better. But the simple method is still really good, just not sublime. So I leave it to you to decide which method works best for your lifestyle and cooking style. I highly encourage you to try the stretch and fold method at least once. The crust it produces is chef's kiss. Now, if you're looking for another fun sourdough project, make sure to check out my sourdough tortilla recipe. The dough only requires 5 ingredients, you don't have to do a double rise, and it's actually pretty easy to roll out. Side note, I keep my, but the results. Now it's time to perform the first. When the dough wasn't